Yeah, let's start. And after this, we'll start with the first question that we are here to discuss about. So the first question is, Sunil and Kishore work at Threshold Technology, industrial startup company specializing in building a Dyson sphere. Currently, they have a satellite in the deepest reaches of the space, analyzing and sending back an immense amount of cosmic data. When the telemetry data comes in, Sunil has to classify it as important, useful, or negligible. To make things a bit easier on Sunil, Kishore has volunteered to help his co-worker transfer, archive, mark, label, and back up all pertinent data to an external location. As they gain more funding to continue their work, Trishul Technology has been asked to implement proper security governance structure and rules. To make sure all the spatial data is organized, valued, and available at all times, a new data classification policy is also need to be created. What should be Sunil's role after this policy has been issued? So what Sunil is basically doing is, here what Sunil is doing is, so Sunil has to classify it first, and okay. So there are multiple data rules which are possible when doing the data classification. With one is some is data owner. So one can be an owner, one can be a custodian, and so on and so forth. You have multiple rules. So here, Sunil, what is Sunil doing is, Sunil is defining the classification labels. So classification labels can have multiple, there can be multiple tiers. It can be private, it can be public, it can be something in between, stuff like that. So when we do data classification, the owner's responsibility is to define the classification requirement of the data, because an owner is the one who knows the context of data for the organization. So the owner defines what kind of data goes, what kind of data will be labeled as public, what kind of data will be labeled as private, and stuff like that. So an owner defines the classification requirement, the archival requirement, how to handle the data, etc., etc., so on and so forth. What a custodian does is, a custodian's responsibility is to put all the technical controls which are required to enforce the requirements which are defined by the owner, which will be obviously defined in a policy document of some sort. A custodian is a much lower level technical job, and owner's responsibility is to oversee the entire operation, to define the requirements to the custodian for the custodian to implement the controls. So here what Sunil is doing is, he's basically classifying data. So since he's classifying the data, he is the owner here. So the correct answer for this question will be, Sunil is a data owner, because he's defining whether a data is important, useful, or negligible. Similarly, as I've told you, it can be private, public, or anything in between. So important is something very important for the organization, which is Threshold Technology, and negligible is something which can be made public without much risk to the organization. So let's move on to the second question. The correct answer is data owner, as you can see here. I'll erase it. Yeah, so the correct answer is data owner. Now, when protecting information asset, which of the following security control is most effective for data in motion? So what we are talking about here is, so data can be in three states. It can be either in rest, at rest. Sorry, I'll erase it. So yeah, data can be in our information systems, data can be at three states. One is at rest, other is in use, at rest, in use, or in motion. So here we are talking about data in motion. When data is at rest, we can simply encrypt the data, and it will be not visible, not legible for the intruder. When data in use, there is little to no protection that we can put on the data. And when data is in motion, it basically means that data is on wire. So here's your one computer, here's another computer, and in between there is a internet. And when it is on the internet, when it is on this wire, is when this data is on motion. When it is sitting on the machine, on the secondary storage, say your hard disk or SSD, then it is at rest. When it is in the secondary storage, that is hard disk or solid state drive, then it is at rest. When it is in use, it will be generally in your RAM whenever a processing is happening on the machine, on the data. Then data is called in use, to be in use. And when it is in motion is when it is on the wire, when data is here on the wire, when it is transmitted across the network between two devices, that is when it is in motion. So when it is in motion, the best course of action for anyone is to use network encryption techniques. And in that too, you can use a technique called TLS, transport level layer security, which is a standard protocol for protecting the data at motion. So the correct answer for this will be TLS, transport layer security. Asha, actually, this is incorrect. The correct answer for this one is TLS. I hope you can change it. Asha. Hello. Okay, so moving on to the third question. Same as the previous question, when protecting the data at rest, so we discussed about data at rest, in motion, and in use. So when protecting data at rest, it is best to encrypt the entire data, which is sitting on your secondary storage. As I've already told you, it will be either sitting on a HDD hard disk drive or a solid state drive. So there you can simply apply some sort of encryption, full disk encryption, and using any kind of a symmetric algorithm, which is less computationally heavy, so it is easier on your processor to process. So we use any symmetric algorithm to protect data at rest, which is stored on your secondary storage, which is not actively used. So the correct answer for this question will be any symmetric algorithm which is used for full disk encryption. For example, you can take AES. So the answer for this question will be AES, and here the correct answer is mentioned incorrectly. It will be AES, whole disk encryption with AES. Okay, moving on to the fourth question. Okay, the second question was having two parts. Moving on to the third question. The IT department head is looking into purchasing a security control for a system that hosts processes owned by a sales program manager. And the system is valued at 5 million. The options for the cost of control are either 2 million from one vendor or 4 million from a different vendor. The IT department initially chooses the 4 million purchase option, but the head of sales interjects and requests an analysis comparing the two different solutions. And after some discussions, both departments decide to go with the 2 million solution. What role is represented by the head of the sales department? So here are two people. One is IT department head and other is the sales program manager. And the process is owned by this person, sales program owner. So what we discussed about roles and responsibilities, that there are data owners, there can be owner, there can be custodian, there can be stewards. Okay, so what owner does is, as I've already mentioned, that owner defines the controls that they require, the sensitivity of the data, who can see what they can see, to what extent they can see, etc. What custodians do is, custodians' responsibility is to put the technical controls to enforce the requirements of owners on the data. Or in this case, this sales program manager, it seems more like a owner, and the IT department head is more of a custodian here, because they'll be responsible to choose the right controls to enforce the requirements of owner on the processes, the sales processes owned by the sales program manager. So basically, what role, so the question is, what role represented by the department head of sales department? Anytime we are enforcing any control, we do a cost benefit analysis to figure out what is the cost of a system. In that, we check whether what is the cost of the system, the hardware itself, what is the cost of software which is installed in it, what is the cost of data which is stored in it, and what is the cost of reputational loss or any legal requirements that are associated with that system. So these are the costs that we take into consideration. And whenever we choose a control to reduce the risk to acceptable levels while mitigating it, we see that the control never exceed the cost of this system itself. So basically what we are talking about is what is the role of the sales department head in this case. And he's a owner. He's basically a business owner. So business owner will be the right answer for this question. Moving on to the fourth question. Which of the following is least effective security control regarding sensitive data stored in mobile devices? So generally, typically when somebody asks you this question, they'll give you some options like whether you can remotely wipe the device. So remote wipe is one option. So say you have a corporate managed device in which your corporate data is stored, and now that device is lost somehow. The employee, somebody steals the device from the employee. Now you can simply securely wipe the data remotely so that the data is not compromised. And maintaining that, you have a backup copy of that data available somewhere else. So in that case, you can securely remotely wipe the data, and hence you protect the data. Similarly, they'll tell you whether to enforce any policy of some sort to protect the data or anything. Then they'll give you another option that your UEM will be there. So your UEM will be there. UEM is your enterprise management suite, basically a mobile device management suite of some sort, which will enforce the policies remotely and uniformly across the devices managed by the organization. And there'll be some other options like use TLS or something. It will be a distraction only. So what will be the least effective thing to do here is, first, this is junk. The best option to choose is policy. So when they're asking, generally in case of CISSP, when you're solving any question, policy supersedes everything because policy is the kind of document which oversees everything. Everything is governed by the policy itself. Policy decides your processes and whatever deployments that you're going to do in the environment, that will be defined by the policy itself. So generally, policy is a governing document. Here we are asking for effectiveness of security control. So this is a security control. This is also security control. This is also security control. But policy is not a security control in itself. So that will be the least effective security control in this case. And hence the correct option will be to enact any policy for defining whether the sensitivity of the data is stored on the corporate devices, or what kind of a treatment shall be done, or any data lifecycle management which is defined in a policy will be superfluous in this case, because we are talking about effectiveness of security control, which we are going to implement. Moving on to the next question. We have this question. Yeah, this is a very good question. In the modern era, are paper records still a significant concern in the protection of enterprise data assets? If so, why? If not, why not? So basically, what they are telling you is, still today, if you're receiving any emails, maybe you are asked to take a printout, append your signature on it. Since your organization is not following this digital signature or something which is already in your archive. So when your systems did not move to IT, did not move to online solutions, it was working on files and whatnot. It was working on paper. So still some of your sensitive data is there in the paper. So do we need to do the paper records still pose as a significant concern is in protecting the enterprise data asset? And if so, why or why not? So definitely it's a big yes. They pose as a significant concern in protection of enterprise data, because say you have labeled some file as sensitive, and your DLP, whenever you'll enforce the DLP on web, you'll enforce the DLP on network, host, and whatnot. So you'll enforce the DLP on all the digital channels that are there. But if somebody is taking a printout of that sensitive data and simply taking it outside the organization, and there's no physical control put for to prevent such kind of a breach, then still your private data is compromised, which shall not be happening, and hence your paper records shall still be considered as a significant concern in protection of enterprise data asset. Moving on to the sixth question. I'll erase the ink. Just give me a second. Yeah, moving on to the sixth question. We have this. A business impact analysis is considered a full functional analysis. Which of the following is not carried out during the business impact analysis? Business impact analysis. What BIA is? So if you've heard of BCP, which is business continuity plan or process, in which in BCP we do BIA. In BIA we identify the key activities which an organization needs to perform in order to keep on working to its goal. Okay, so what the question is that a BIA is considered functional analysis. Which of the following is not carried out during the business impact analysis? So while business impact analysis, you do interviews, you form metrics, you do other discussions of some sort. For example, there are some methods of achieving a consensus around the team, across the team. And when developing a metric, you try to formulate a standard parameter against which all the key activities can be assessed. All the importance of all the key activities can be assessed. For example, if you have a, say, if you're a financial company and you have a CBS or say core banking solution, on which every channel transaction terminates. For example, you have the CBS on which your transaction from IMPS, from UPI, from your internet banking, everything terminates here, and then only the processing of these transactions happens. So this becomes your key activity. If this fails, everything else, all these channels, no matter if they are working or not, will start failing. So the transactions will not get through. So one of the metrics can be the number of transactions. Okay, so say if my IMPS goes down, how much transactions will I lose per minute or per unit time, per hour, maybe, whatever the thing is, whatever the metric is. And then we define the RTO and RPO, which is recovery time objective and recovery point objective. Okay, and then there is one more thing, MTPD, which is maximum tolerable time, after which you cannot recover the business. So what you do not do in a business impact analysis, during a business impact analysis, is that you do not actually interrupt anything and go to a DR site. Okay, so you have DC site from where your usual business operates, and then you have a disaster recovery site where in case of a disaster, you move your operations from DC to DR. Okay, so what you do not do is you do not do a full interruption test. That is basically interrupting this and moving to DR, moving all operations to DR. That is something we do not do during a BIA. So the correct answer for this question will be not doing a full interruption test or a parallel full interruption test. Moving on to the seventh question. Which of the following steps comes first in business impact analysis? So what I've told you about BIA is, in BIA, we sit down with all the team members. We try to formulate a metric to assess the impact of any key activity failing. If any of the key activities goes down, then what will be the impact of it will be on my business? That is what business impact analysis is. So what we do is we first of all define the data gathering technique. What is a data gathering technique? I've told you before, we either interview all the teammates, or we simply review all the paper, all the processes, policies, etc. And we try to formulate a metric, as I've told you in the last question, that we can relate everything to CBS being the key activity and number of transactions being a key metric for assessing the impact on the business. Okay, so the first thing that comes to a BIA process is defining a data gathering technique. How I'm going to gather the data, whether I'm going to look into all the policies, all the documentation that has been done by the team, or whether I'll be going through the document first and then interviewing the team to understand whatever undocumented changes which are done in the environment, and which will give me a better visibility of how should I carry out the business impact analysis of the key activities of the organization. So the first step for BIA will be creating a data gathering technique. Moving on to the eighth question. Megan wants to prepare media to allow for its reuse in the environment, operating at the same sensitivity level. Which of the following is the best options to meet her need? So your possible options can be, it can be sanitization, it can be purging, it can be clearing, and so on and so forth. There can be multiple techniques. So the keywords here are A, we need to reuse the media, and B, we need to reuse it in the same sensitivity level. So these are your keywords. Since the sensitivity level is not changing, the data will be of same sensitivity level. Say if earlier there was public data stored on this media, then after whatever treatment is this media is going through, again public data will be stored in it, and we need to preserve the media physically because we need to reuse it in the environment. So for this case, clearing seems to be the best example, and one of the methods with which we do clearing is simply formatting the disk. So what formatting does is, in your file allocation table, say FAT, or any file journaling system that you're using, the journaling system simply removes the file names and their mappings, address mapping from its records, and hence your media looks for the operating system as a free media where it can store the information. And since the keywords were to reuse and on the same sensitivity level, hence clearing seems to be the most apt answer, because you'll simply format the drive or format the media and reuse it in the environment. Moving on to the ninth question. Jacob's organization uses the US government's data classification system, which includes top secret, secret, confidential, and unclassified ratings from most sensitive to the least. Jacob encounters a system that contains secret, confidential, and top secret data. How should it be classified? So there is a hierarchy to it. First, it is top secret, which is most sensitive. Then you have secret. Then you have confidential. Okay, so there are three kind of data which are stored in the media. Okay, and now Jacob is supposed to classify it. So it is a thumb rule that whatever the top sensitivity rating is of the data stored on the media will be the categorization for that media. So in this case, since the top secret comes on the topmost of the hierarchy of data classification, hence since the media contains this kind of data also, it will be rated top secret. Okay, it's a basic, very pointed question, very easy to solve. Okay, so the data will be rated top secret. Moving on to the 10th question, which is Chandra wants to secure an encryption key. Which location would be the most difficult to protect if the key was kept and used in that location? So as I've told you before, data can be at rest, in use, or in motion. Okay, sorry, I'll clear it. Just give me a second. It can be at rest, in use, or in motion. When it is in motion, you can make a tunnel between the two terminals, and hence your data is protected. When it is at rest, you can simply encrypt it and everything is protected. But when it is in use, your processor needs to decrypt it first in order to process it. That is where it is most vulnerable. Okay. So where your data is stored in, when it is at rest, it is stored at storage. When it is in motion, it is on network. But when it is in use, it is on memory or your RAM in this case. Whatever your working memory is where the data in use resides. So in this case, if you wish to secure your encryption key, where it will be most difficult to protect is here in memory. Moving on to the 11th question. Mike wants to track hardware assets as devices and equipments are moved throughout his organization. What type of system can help do this without requiring staff to individually check barcodes and serial numbers? So in this case, since we do not want to do barcodes, so barcode and QR code, technically they work similar for in this case, in case of locating and tracking your hardware assets, they work in a similar manner. So any kind of barcoding or QR code works in the same fashion. You have to use specific terminals which are capable of reading these codes, and then you can simply scan it and move. What you can do is, since we are talking about movement of devices and equipments, hardware assets basically. Hardware assets, movement is the keywords here. And we also do not want the staff to individually check the barcodes. So what we can do is something like an RFID. So what RFID is, it is a radio frequency identification. And these are generally passive tags, which are storing some data and are open for any RFID active device. In this case, one active and one passive device is there. Passive devices generally doesn't require power. So you store the data in the tag, whatever the asset tag is. And then the active terminal, as soon as it comes in contact of a passive device, as soon as the passive device comes in contact of active terminal, it will be read from the tag itself and there'll be no manual intervention required. So an RFID tag will be the most suited option in this case. So moving on to the 12th question. John's network begins to experience symptoms of slowness. Upon investigation, he realizes that the network is being bombarded with TCP SYN packets and believes that his organization is the victim of denial of service attack, that is a DOS attack. What principle of information security is being violated? So there are three principles of security, that is CIA, that forms CIA triad. C is confidentiality. I is integrity. And A is availability. What integrity is, that whatever data you have stored must not be modified in an unauthorized manner. Availability is data must be made available or system must be made available to the users as and when required by them. What confidentiality is, only the people who needs to know do know the thing about your system. Okay. What is happening here is TCP SYN. So what TCP SYN is, when we open a TCP session, what happens? This is my sender, this is my receiver. What happens is your sender sends a SYN request to the receiver. The receiver acknowledges your SYN packet and sends its SYN. And then you send final acknowledgement to the SYN of this SYN receiver. And hence your three-way handshake completes. First, the receiver sends a SYN packet to receive. The sender sends a SYN packet to the receiver. The receiver acknowledges receiving that SYN packet and sends its SYN. And then finally, the sender acknowledges the SYN of the receiver. And hence your three-way handshake completes. So in this case, what is happening is too much SYN is being received by the receiver, which is overwhelming the receiver, which is basically a DOS, denial of service. What is happening is the receiver is unable to serve the request back. So what we are losing is availability of the system. Anybody who genuinely wants to use the system won't be able to use it. So the availability is lost. Sorry, the answer again for this one is incorrect. It is availability here. Moving on to the third question. Alan works for an e-commerce company that recently had some content stolen by another website and republished without permission. What type of intellectual property protection would be best to preserve the Alan's company's rights? Now, what kind of intellectual property protection laws which are there are some of the examples are your trademarks. You have trademarks, then you have copyrights, then you have patents, etc. Okay, so what they're talking about is some content. This is an e-commerce company and some content was stolen and republished. Okay, so something which was already there in the website was taken from here and republished on your website too. What has happened is somebody has copied the data without the proper permissions, which is an infringement of copyrights. So the correct answer will be copyright. Moving on to the 14th question. So Reimer Tech is in a position to acquire a sports agency for 8.24 billion, whatever number is. The CFO will create a financial statement of the agency's tangible and intangible assets, goodwill, liabilities, and total purchase price. The document will be sent to a legal and accounting teams of both the companies who will perform their due diligence. After agreement, the documents will be formally approved by the CEO of both entities. The security requirements are that all financial statements, records, and contracts are protected from alteration. Neither party is to directly modify, send, or receive any documents on their own. A custom system application is currently being created to facilitate this process and meet the security objectives. Which security model is best suited for this? So when you read security models, there are many security models. To name a few is Biba, then you have Bell LaPadula, then you have Clark Wilson, etc., etc. So Biba works on integrity, this works on confidentiality, this again works on integrity of data. So what the requirements here are is protection from alteration. That is what integrity is. Neither party is directly modified. There's no direct modification of it or receive it. So in this case, I think the Clark-Wilson model will supersede everything, because what it defines is it defines constrained data objects and unconstrained data object, and then it defines a TP, transformation process. So any user who wishes to access the unconstrained data objects can directly, this is our naive user who doesn't know anything. Any user who wants to access the system or the data, if it is unconstrained data object, then it can directly be accessed. But if a user wants to use constrained data object, then it will go through the transformation process. What transformation process is? It is a defined set of things that you can perform on the constrained data objects. For example, if you have a table in a RDBMS and you are the user who is properly authenticated and have access to modify this table can only modify it to the extent of data type which is stored in that row or tuple. Okay, for example, if it is account number, then there'll be a restriction that account number, all numbers, and of 15 in length. So if the user tries to put just 12, 13 numbers, he won't be able to do it. If he tries to put 15 letters, anything which is not all numbers or smaller or larger than 15, not exactly 15 in length, will not be accepted. So that is how transformation process works. It is the restrictions enforced on to what extent user can modify the constrained data set. Okay. So in this case, the requirements are such that only Clark-Wilson model will be best suited for their use case. So Clark-Wilson will be the best option in this case. Moving on to the 15th question. Operating system can be programmed to carry out different methods for process isolation. Which of the following refers to a method in which an interface defines how communication can take place between two processes and no processes can interact with others' internal programming code? So what is happening here is you are basically taking a function there is an interface and no process can interact with the others internal programming. So no process is allowed to interact with this function directly. There'll be just one gate through which you can interact with this function. Okay. So we are basically encapsulating this function or object in this case on which a subject is performing actions through this interface. That may be an API or something else, that is application programming interface. So we are encapsulating the object in this case. Okay, that will be the correct option. Moving on to the 16th question. Okay. Since development team is designing a new operating system, one of the requirements of the new product is that critical memory segments need to be categorized as non-executable with the goal of reducing malicious code from being able to execute instructions in privileged mode. The team also wants to make sure that attackers will have a difficult time predicting execution target addresses. Which of the following best describes the type of protection that needs to be provided by the operating system? So what they are trying to do is they are designing a new operating system. Critical memory segments need to be categorized as non-executable. So what we are doing is basically data execution prevention. One example of this in Windows is if you go here under advanced security, in performance, you can see there's data execution prevention. So you can define what components of the operating system or what processes can be run as privileged processes. So that is data execution prevention, which is the correct answer. I would like to take a pause for a minute. Can we do it? Okay, moving on to the 17th question, which is, what is the greatest advantage of an IaaS in public cloud over a private cloud over a public cloud? Okay. So cloud delivery models can be private, public, and hybrid, in which some resources sit on premises, which is your private cloud, and some resources sit in public. So a mix of the above two is hybrid cloud. Then your delivery can be in three modes. One is infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service or application as a service. Okay. What they're asking is advantage of infrastructure as a service in private cloud over a public cloud. So in private cloud, all the resources are hosting your own applications. That is the only advantage that you get over the public cloud. So you get dedicated resources. That is the correct answer here. Moving on to 18th question. During the third-party vulnerability scan and security testing, Daniel's employer recently discovered that the embedded systems that were installed to manage her company's new buildings have a severe remote access vulnerability. The manufacturer has gone out of business and there is no patch or update for the devices. What should Daniel recommend that her employer do about the hundreds of devices that are vulnerable? So first condition is that these are embedded systems, okay, and which have severe remote access vulnerability, and manufacturer has gone out of business. That means there'll be no patch or update. So their best course of action is, since these can be remotely exploited, hence this means that these are connected to network. So these are the embedded devices which are connected to your network. Now what you'll do is move them to a different segment. This is your organization network, move them to a different segment, and hence there'll be no inter-segment communication. There'll be two different gateways. Create a new sub-interface here on the router. And that is how we can do it. So we can simply isolate it and move these devices to a new network segment. That is what we are going to do, because there's no patch for this. And these are essential for maintaining the company's new building. So we cannot remove these devices. What we can do is move it to a separate segment where only these devices will be able to communicate with each other. And that's it. No external communication will be allowed. Moving on to the 19th question. The CISO of global bank is traveling to a country where the internet is monitored. She needs to send a secret message to the bank's CEO, but her remote VPN client is being blocked by the host nation's internet service provider. She calls the bank's security officer, who suggests to first write up her secret message, hash it with SHA-256, encrypt the hash digest with her private key, and then email the encrypted hash along with her secret message to the CEO. The CEO will hash the message, decrypt the encrypted hash with the CISO's public key, and compare it to the appended message. Which of the following has not been achieved? So here, two things are coming into picture. First is your PKI, which is public key infrastructure. Give me a second. I'll take a minute's pause. Give me a second. Okay, yeah. So this talks about PKI. In PKI, what we do is we have just a second. In PKI, we have digital certificates. We have public and private key, that is asymmetric algorithm, asymmetric encryption. So what happens is when you're using asymmetric algorithms for encryption, you generate a public and private key pair. Private key always remains with you, and public key is what you can send outside. What happens is in PKI is there are certifying authorities, trusted CAs, which sign your public key along with some of your information with their private key. So there again, there is private key and there is public key. And this public key of the trusted CA is available on the host application. So whenever you use PKI, you send something with which is encrypted with your public key, with your private key. And since your public key is already and you send your digital certificate along with your message, so that when somebody opens this message, they'll be able to access your digital certificate. That digital certificate contains your public key, and since you have encrypted the message with your private key, it will be able to unlock it. It will be able to decrypt it. And how do somebody ensure that that public key, whichever you have shared in the digital certificate, belongs to you? Is that the public key was certified by this trusted CA's private key, of which public key is already sitting with the user. So user's application uses that public key of trusted CA to first unlock the public key that you have shared, which was attested by trusted CA's private key, to get your public key and then decrypt the message that you have encrypted with your private key. That is how you build trust in the network. What is happening here is they have written the secret message, they have hashed it, that is ensuring the integrity of message. Encrypt the hash, they have ensured the confidentiality of hash and not the message. Okay. And then email the encrypted hash along with the secret message. Your message is still not encrypted. Only the hash is encrypted. So what happened, what is not being achieved is what they should have done is, here is your message. You encrypt the message and you hash it. Okay. And since hash is already one-way function, which is already encrypted, you do not need to re-encrypt it. You just attach the hash to the message, encrypted message. Now this is your encrypted message and your hash, and send it to your recipient. Recipient, when they receive the encrypted message, since this was encrypted with their private key, with the sender's private key, this is your sender and this is your recipient. When the recipient receives the encrypted message, which was encrypted with sender's private key, he'll use the sender's public key, which can be safely circulated across the network because it is public key. It can be known to the public. So the recipient will unlock the message with its public key, hash the message again with the same algorithm, which is SHA-256 in this case, and compare the appended hash with the hash that he had gotten from the message, and hence ensure the integrity. So in this case, since they have not encrypted the message, they have lost the confidentiality. Since the message was sent in plain text, any man in the middle, because there was no VPN, since the VPN was getting blocked. So there was no secure tunnel between these two computers. And when that person has sent the message on wire, it was not encrypted. So confidentiality, anybody who is wiretapping or something, who is sitting here, can simply see the message because it's not encrypted. So the confidentiality is not maintained. Moving on to the 20th question. Tom is responsible for maintaining the security of systems used to control industrial processes located within a power plant. What term is used to describe these systems? So you must have heard of industrial control systems, and one of the systems which is used for the controls located across wider. So in case of a networked industrial control system structure, you use SCADA system to manage these systems, industrial control systems. So the correct answer is SCADA in this case. Moving on to the 21st question. Chris wants to verify that a software package that he downloaded matches the original version. What hashing tool should he use if he believes that technically sophisticated attackers may be replaced the software package with a version that contains backdoor? So we have multiple hashing algorithms which are available. Say you have MD5, you have SHA-1, you have SHA-2, etc. So these are known to be exploitable. So if he knows that the attacker may have replaced the software package with a version containing a backdoor, he should use SHA-2, which alternatively is also called SHA-256. So the correct answer is SHA-256. Moving on to the 22nd question. Alice and Bob would like to use an asymmetric crypto system to communicate with each other. They are located in different parts of the country, but have exchanged encryption key by using digital certificate signed by a mutual trusted certificate authority. If Alice wants to send Bob a message that is encrypted for confidentiality, what key does he use to encrypt the message? So the aim is to achieve confidentiality. In order to achieve confidentiality, Alice will use Bob's, because our sender is Alice and Bob is recipient. Okay. Bob will generate a pair, private and public, and Alice will generate also a pair, private and public. This public key can be safely given to Bob, and this public key can safely given to Alice. If Alice wishes his message to remain confidential, that means only Bob will be able to open it. And since Bob is having the private key corresponding to this public key, if Alice encrypts this message with Bob's public key, only Bob and Bob alone will be able to access this message, because only he is having the private key corresponding to the public key, which is used to encrypt this message. So the Bob's public key will be used to ensure confidentiality of this message. Similarly, the second question is, when Bob received the encrypted message from Alice, what key does he use to decrypt the message plain text content? So we go back here, and what we see here is, in order to decrypt it, Bob will require its private key to read the message which is encrypted using Bob's public key, because public private key pairs can encrypt and decrypt message for each other. So something which is encrypted with public key can be decrypted by the private key. So Bob's private key will be used here. Moving on to the 23rd question. Health Tracking App Incorporated is a US based corporation that develops and sells apps that its customers can use to track various aspects of their own health, from their daily exercise regimes to various medical test results and comparative statistics over time. STS customer data is breached via vulnerability in its application programming interface. This vulnerability is discovered to be a result of a recently announced security flaw in the underlying Java framework that STA uses for the development of its application. Which of the following is best described as the root cause of this problem? So when you read about upstream and downstream supplies, what is happening is, this is my STA, health tracking apps. It is using some services from some vendors and giving some services to its customers. So here is your customers who are using STA's application, and here is your vendors who are giving services to STA. What happened is, they were using a Java framework in which there was a security flaw, which led to a data breach. So what happened is, they failed to manage the risk associated with the supply chain that they have established. They were relying on this Java framework for delivering this application to their customers. So there was an upstream supply chain risk which was not taken care of. Moving on to the 24th question. A company has made significant configuration changes that would protect them from most open system OSI, open system interconnect layer 4 attacks, from which attacks, are they still vulnerable? So OSI is a 7-layer model, which is very basic for anybody who is dealing in network and security. So it is physical, data link, network, transport, session, presentation, application. Okay. So layer 4 is transport, where your TCP and UDP reside. What we need to do is they have already done some changes to protect this layer. Now SYN is associated with TCP, as we have already discussed earlier in this discussion. And your Fraggle attack is attached with UDP. So if you know these attacks, these are layer 4 attacks. So what it is still vulnerable to is a Smurf and ping flood. And hence that is your option. That is your correct answer, 2 and 4. Moving on to 25th question. Determining the geographic location of a client IP address in order to route it towards the most proximal topological source of web content is an example of what technology? So we use something called edge computing. So latency plays a big role in case of customer experience, and it is always a good idea to keep a replica of content near to the customer, near to the user. So this technology is called CDN, which is content delivery network, which basically say this is your server, which is having an original copy. It will constantly keep caching a copy on this edge device from where the user will actually fetch the data. So this is called a content delivery distribution network, content delivery or distribution network. Now moving on to 26th question. End-to-end encryption is used by users and link encryption is used by service provider. Which of the following currently describe these technology? So generally, so let me explain the end-to-end encryption and link encryption to you. And I hope after this, you'll be able to solve it. So what is happening is this is a router, this is a router, and here's my sender, here's my recipient. Again, this is a router, this is a router, this is a router. Here's my recipient, here's my sender. What happens in end-to-end encryption is here is another router, and here's my. There can be switches in between. There can be firewalls in between. But this is how it generally looks. What happens in end-to-end encryption is there are two parts in a message which is floating in the network. One is header, other is payload. Payload is your actual message. Header is information related to all the protocols and techniques which are used to transmit your data from this point to this point. Okay. What happens in end-to-end encryption is your payload is encrypted, and hence nobody can read your payload, but everybody can read the header information. So the sender's IP, receiver's IP, everything is visible to these intermediate routers, switches, or whatever devices which are in between, which help you route the packet to the receiver. What happens in a link encryption is this: here's your header, here's your payload, and then you encrypt the entire packet, and then you send it across the network. So on every hop, since this router doesn't know what to do with this packet, it will decrypt the packet first, read the header information, re-encrypt the packet, and send it to the next hop. Here again, this will arrive like this. The router will again decrypt it to read this header information and then see, okay, this needs to go here. So what happens is at every hop, your packet gets decrypted and re-encrypted. So anybody who's having access to this router may read the information which is located inside this packet. So in link encryption, this is what happens. Your entire header and payload is encrypted and decrypted at each and every hop. In end-to-end encryption, what happens is your header information is not encrypted, only your payload is encrypted. Thus, routing happens smoothly, and your data remains, your actual message remains encrypted throughout the message. So the correct answer is link encryption encrypt everything but data. Link encryption encrypts everything but data link messaging. Yeah, basically link encryption encrypts everything, your header information as well as your payload. Moving on to the 27th question. Vivian would like to hire a software tester to come in and evaluate a web application from user's perspective. Which one of the following tests best simulates the perspective? So there can be three options. Either you do a black box or do a gray box or do a white box. A white box is when you have entire information about the internal working of the application. Black box is when you do not have any idea of how the application is working. And gray box is when you have somewhat knowledge of how the application is working. In this case, since user's perspective is involved, user doesn't know the internal operations of the application. So it will be a black box. Moving on to 28th question. Linda is reviewing posts to a user forum on her company's website. And when she browses a certain post, a message pops up in dialog box, on her screen, reading alert. She reviews the source code for the post and finds the following code snippet. What was the likely motivation of the user who posted the message on the forum containing this code? So there's a concept called cyber kill chain, which was developed by Lockheed Martin, that company which manufactures airplane. Just let me clear it and move to pen again. Just give me a second. Yeah. So there's something called cyber kill chain, and an attack starts with recon. Recon basically is acquiring the knowledge about various systems that the target environment is using. So what is happening here is somebody has planted a script on the company's websites where users can freely post, on the forum where a user can freely post. So that is the recon step. What vulnerability lies in Linda's messaging board is cross-site scripting, because when you read cross-site scripting, that can be of two types. One is persistent, the other is reflected. What happens in reflected is when you load a website, some data is sent from the server to your client, which is your browser, and browser, without thinking twice, runs whatever data, parses whatever data the server has sent to you. In case of a reflected cross-site scripting, what happens is the malicious attacker simply modifies this request, and if server is not filtering the content, it will simply reflect it back to the user, and the browser will parse it. For example, if say you received a mail containing a link which is containing something like this, or which is containing a malicious code, and the server is not filtering that malicious code, then you'll simply receive the code back to your browser, and it will get executed on your browser. So that is a reflected cross-site scripting. The other is persistent cross-site reflecting, uh, cross-site scripting. And in this question, the same is shown, the persistent form of it. So what happens is, if you are not using input filters in whatever text fields or anything where the custom user input can be obtained on your website, then users can simply put scripts on your website's web page, and as soon as somebody loads that web page, this code also gets executed. What happened in this case? There is a blog post where somebody has posted a script. So it is user based and it is persistent because it is stored on your web page, and every time somebody will visit that web page, this script will get executed. So hence it is persistent. And the kind of vulnerability which exists in the Linda's message board is cross-site scripting. Moving on to 28th question. Again, there is persistent cross-site scripting, which is the device which Linda's website is vulnerable for. Linda communicates the vendor and determines that no patch is available to correct this vulnerability. Which one of the following devices would be able to best help and defend her application against further attack? So one can use either routers, ACL, etc., to filter the uh, requests which are coming in. One can use firewalls, but in this case, since it is a case of HTTP itself, how the application, it is a case of application layer security, the 7th layer of OSI model, where a WAF can be most effective, which is a web application firewall, which are application specific firewalls. Hence, WAF will be the best option for this case. Susan has been asked, 29th question is, Susan has been asked to recommend whether her organization should use a MAC scheme or a DAC scheme. If flexibility and scalability are important requirements of implementing access control, which scheme should she recommend and why? So what is a MAC? MAC is acronym for mandatory access control. And then DAC is your discretionary access control. What happens in MAC is you have security labels, which is top secret, secret, confidential. Then DAC will define what kind of access can you have based on these security labels. There is no flexibility in that system. In case of discretionary access control, whoever is an author can choose to allow other people to have access and to what extent they'll have access to the resources. For example, the file permission rule sets in Windows are example of DAC. Windows operating system uses DAC. So since here flexibility and scalability are the important requirements, DAC will be the best suited option, because DAC allows the author to flexibly assign permissions, and scalability, since in case of Mac, there are very rigid controls, scalability becomes a challenge. So DAC will be the best option here. The 30th question is, which one of the following is not an example of backup tape rotation scheme? So it can be father, son, grandfather, and multiple options can be there. What is not a tape rotation scheme is meet in the middle. Okay. Father, son, grandfather, what happens is you take weekly incremental backups, and then you take full backup by the weekend. Then over the weekends, in the last week of the month, you take a full monthly backup. So these are sons, this is father, this is grandfather. That is how you do backup rotation. And that is the last question for this session. I hope you like this session. I hope it will help you crack the interviews related to CISSP certification, and leave your feedback with the team. You can find me on LinkedIn with XOSNChamp handle. So thank you all for attending this. I hope you have a great day ahead. Good luck. Thank you.